Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Lunch and Learn. We have got our amazing live virtual studio audience waiting for us on Zoom. So do come along and say hello. It's where the magic happens. To the thousands watching on Zoom and to the millions watching on YouTube and Facebook. Welcome one, welcome all. We are going to talk a little bit about Parashat Chukat, which is this week's parasha, and then we will get underway with Pirkei Avot. So a little bit about Parashat Chukat. It's another monumental, pivotal moment in Jewish history. It's the moment at which everything changes for Moshe Rabbeinu. The parasha starts off though talking about the mitzvah of the red heifer, of the not the golden calf, of the red cow, which is a chok. That's the reason why it's called chukat. A chok is a type of mitzvah that we just cannot understand. There is just not the rational understanding and the rational way of explaining this Mishnah. So many of the mitzvahs, so many of the mitzvot that we have and that we do, there's some semblance of ability to understand it. But chukat, sorry, let's try that one again. But the red heifer, the para aduma, is one of the exceptions that is classified as a chok. We just do not fully understand the depth of the reason behind the unique character of this mitzvah. Essentially, what would happen is that if they found one of these red heifers, they would process it so that they had the ashes of the red heifer. And any time somebody needed to undergo the purification process in the Mishkan or in the temple, the ashes of the para aduma would factor into that purification process. And one of the reasons why it's so ununderstandable, if that's even a real word, is because it had the capacity to contaminate the person who was orchestrating the or leading the purification process. So on the one hand, it would purify someone who is impure, but it would contaminate the person who was pure. So it's a very interesting, obscure, and unique mitzvah in the Torah. So that's what this week's parasha starts off with, the mitzvah of the red heifer, of the para aduma. After talking a little bit about elements of ritual impurity in different settings, we then have the very sad news about Miriam's passing. Miriam was Aaron and Moshe's sister, and she dies in this week's parasha. We've already fast forwarded to the end of the 40 years in the desert. We basically skip over 38 years of history where there's no narrative whatsoever. So we're now at the end part of the Jewish people's trekking through the wilderness, and we fast forwarded nearly 4 decades to get to this point where Miriam dies. And Miriam was a very special lady, and in her merit, the Jewish people were constantly provided with water from the Be'er Miriam, the well of Miriam. So that water source dries up after Miriam's passing, and that's why we encounter another episode of Moshe having to draw water from a rock. Now, way back when, a few weeks ago, when we spoke about this, when was it, Parashat B'Shalach? So he was commanded to strike the rock. So he did. He struck the rock and out came water. In this week's Parasha, he is commanded to speak to the rock. Part of the reason why he is commanded to speak to the rock instead of to hit the rock is because Hashem wanted the Jewish people to understand that as they get closer and closer to entering into the land of Israel, things are going to change. And they're not going to have the same level of miraculous provision as they once had. And he wanted them to understand that when we want something, we have to daven for it. And we have to turn to Hashem and speak to him. So that was what he wanted the Jewish people to understand. Moshe should speak to the rock, and in so doing, that would produce the water. But he didn't end up getting it right. And so he strikes the rock, and the water comes out again. Miracle occurs, just like it did before, but because he had missed the point, and the message and the lesson, he gets sentenced to die outside of the land of Israel. He doesn't merit to enter into the land of Israel with the rest of the Jewish people. We then also have the news that Aaron HaKohen, Aaron the high priest, is also going to die. Although I just missed one part out, which is that the Jews request to travel through the land of Edom on their way to reaching Eretz Israel. They reject that offer. They deny permission, and so they have to take a longer route. And then we come to the point in the parsha talking about Aaron's death, and his son Elazar gets appointed as the next Kohen Gadol in his place. Very interesting thing, by the way. We're taught that they went to a place called Hor Hahar for him to die, for him to pass away. Hor Hahar. Just going to see if it translates it in any unique way in the art scroll. Mount Hor. Okay, so Hor Hahar, which is spelled Hey Resh, Hey Resh, Hor Hahar. And I just remember learning this fascinating idea that if you take the letters either side of the Hey and the Resh, so if we can picture a Hey in our minds, I was meant to draw this up on Microsoft Word, and I didn't end up doing it in time for our session. But if you take the letter Hey, so either side of the Hey, right, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Hey, Vav. So either side of a Hey is a Daled and a Vav. Either side of a Resh is a Kuf and a Shin, right? Kuf, Resh, Shin. So either side of Hor Hahar are the letters Kodesh. Kuf, Vav, Daled, Shin. So there seems to be some kind of allusion here. Hor Hahar, Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies. There's a parallel or some kind of hidden secret there of the fact that Aaron, the high priest, dies on this place called Hor Hahar, and he, as the high priest, was the only one allowed into the Kodesh HaKodashim, into the Holy of Holies. So I remember hearing that from a rabbi called Yossi Chazan in Manchester that stayed with me for many, many years. There was a whole other amazing piece that he had on it, but that's the part that I remember after all these years. So there we go. Hor Hahar Kodesh HaKodashim. Anyway, and then the final part of this week's parsha is a battle. There is a battle at the end of this week's parsha. They are attacked by Amalek, first of all, and they also go to battle with Sichon and Og. The Jewish people are victorious, and it sends out a message to the world that the Jewish people are strong and can't be messed with, which then paves the way for next week's parsha, which will be Parshat Balak, where Balak takes a different strategic approach to try and mess with the Jewish people when he employs Bilam to curse the Jewish people. But that's all in next week's parsha. So any comments or questions on Parshas Chukas before we move on?
I must say I find it very, very difficult that after all the work and effort that Moses had put in, that he should make such a simple mistake, and the cost of making such a simple error, or not, maybe simple, may not be, but the cost to him of that error was amazing. It was an enormous cost. And yet, it didn't seem to his merit the work that he'd done for the previous 40 years, which almost nobody in our history would have been able to do apart from him. And yet he has to suffer the indignity of standing at the top of the hill and not going into Israel. It always seems a very difficult thing to... And the other thing that doesn't, to me, also is difficult is that because Hashem knows what's going to happen tomorrow, we keep getting back into this circular discussion about he knew that he was going to hit it with a rock. He was going to hit the rock. He must have known he was going to hit the rock because nothing happens that he didn't know about. So on that basis, if he already knew that he was going to hit the rock, when he should have spoken to the rock, It all makes things a little difficult.
Good.
Shall I go away?
Pardon me?
Shall I go away?
Not at all. No, it's you.
Well,
You often notice these things because you have a level of sensitivity to the needs of others, and so if you hadn't said anything, I would have thought, oh, where's Paul on this?
oh,
But yeah, he was on a very high level, and so he was judged to a very fine line. The mistake that he made may not have seemed so significant, but for who he was, it was significant. We've mentioned probably a couple of years ago now, back in the day, when we studied the parasha as our primary focus of Lunch and Learn, instead of Pirkei Avot. So we mentioned way back then that part of the reason why he didn't merit to remain as the leader of the Jewish people to enter into the land of Israel is because the mistake that he made in this instance demonstrated that he was how do we say this? He was not what was needed as a leader for the Jewish people in this new phase, right? The mode of leadership needed to change, and the fact that he was not able to get this piece right exhibited or demonstrated that he was not going to suit the type of leadership that was needed for the next phase. So as a result of that, he was not the leader who could take them into the land of Israel. Now, we also have to appreciate that even though he didn't get the physical reward in this world of spending time in the land of Israel, this isn't by any means or way an indication that he has not been suitably rewarded for the holy man, the holiest man out of all of us, that he was. And a few weeks ago we spoke about how this world is just a corridor for the world to come. So he might not have been able to physically enjoy the land of Israel in this life, in this world, but that's not to say that he is not enjoying everything that was made available to him as reward for everything that he did in his lifetime, but in the world to come. So don't worry, Moses is not missing out. He just missed out.
I just don't think it was necessary for him to suffer the indignity that he did on the basis that Hashem said he wasn't the right person to take them in, then great. Let him not take them in, and he could have just died on the top of the hill. It wasn't necessary to add this little bit.
Is it not better to suffer an indignity in this world than to suffer an indignity in the next? And that's something that we find in various places in Torah literature, which is that it is far better to be considered X in this world than to be considered Y in the next world. I recall examples of this. It's better to be considered a fool in this world than to be considered a fool in the next world. It's a bit like that other one. What's it? If you want to, I can't remember. Something about if you want to be considered a fool in this world, then open your mouth, or something like that. Or I can't remember it. But that is the mindset that as a Jew we have to constantly train ourselves to remember. It is much better to undergo difficulty in this world, pain in this world, indignity in this world, embarrassment in this world, than it would be to suffer those same feelings, which would be, the gauge would be turned up a heck of a lot more in the next world. Any time that we experience shame or embarrassment in this world, it's there to give us a semblance of a feeling. Oh, there you go, Gary. Just talk, Gary. Just unmute yourself and say it. Yeah, okay. Well, we'll come back to that in a second. What was I just saying? Yeah, so that any time that we experience and feel shame, and it does it eats us up and it encompasses every part of our body, and we just feel like we want the ground to open up and swallow us, right? That feeling in this world is only a 60th of the intensity of what shame feels like when we experience it beyond our physical lifetime. So it's much better to experience it here than it is to experience it there. And anytime we do have pain, suffering, guilt, shame, regret, whatever it is, in this lifetime, it reduces and it dilutes anything that we might have to face after we pass. Joy and then Joe.
I'm not incredibly familiar with the intricacies of this. How long did Moshe survive
After this
when
point,
the others left after? And did he have many people with him that suffered his indignity with him? His family was tribal or whatever.
okay, so there's not much longer. There's not. We're halfway through Bamidbar, and we've skipped to the end of the 40 years. The book of Devarim only takes place over about 36 days, which is Moses' last address to the Jewish people. So we're dealing with months basically now, from this point until the end of the Torah. And the Torah, the timeline of the Torah ends with the Jews standing at the edge of Mount Sinai. Moses has passed away, and then there's only 8 verses left, where we're on the brink of the land of Israel, ready to go in. And then the book of Joshua is the next part of the narrative, where the Jews actually go in to the land of Israel. So this is all happening at the end, the last part of the timeline. Yeah?
There's a time between when Moses stopped writing and Joshua took it up.
That's the 8 verses.
Do we know where Moses stopped? Because presumably Moses wrote this part about his not being allowed to go into...
It's the last 8 verses, yeah. The last 8 verses.
Can we go back to the red heifer?
Can we do that after Joe's had a chance to speak?
Yes.
Thanks.
Now, I just quickly wanted to say we're looking at Moses as if he had the same feelings as us. We're looking at it from the human. He would have felt the indignity, but in fact he wouldn't. He wasn't a normal person. He already was living half in the other world. Who can converse with God? He was at such a high level that he was above those sort of feelings. He would accept God's will. He wouldn't even have felt it because he was already almost in the spiritual world. Because who can speak to God?
I can agree with you to a certain point.
It was his joy to leave.
I can agree with you to a certain point, but yet we see in a few weeks' time with Parashat Va'et Hanan that he prayed, he pleaded with God 515 times for God to change his mind. So much so that God had to say to him, like, please, no more, because if you pray even one more time, I'm going to have to change my mind. Right? So he obviously did feel it, and he obviously did pray for it, because otherwise the Torah wouldn't tell us that he supplicated in that way. It would have been hard. It would have been hard. It was it was a punishment ultimately.
But his time had gone.
But maybe what you could say is that he was special enough and high enough to not be like, oh, that's it, I'm just done with this then. Which unfortunately, I mean, you can't comment on individuals, but unfortunately that's sometimes the reaction that people have when they suffer an injustice or some kind of pain or punishment, suffering, whatever it is, and they say like, well, I'm just done with you, God. I've got no time for you anymore. Just to pick up on what Gary texted before, better to keep your mouth closed and let people think you're a fool than to open it and remove all doubt. That was what I was trying to think of.
I like that.
And with that, Gary, open your mouth and...
Back to the red heifer. The mixture of the red heifer ashes with the water that was used to cleanse people that have been in contact with the dead. did that carry on into Eretz Yisrael? And why don't we have something like that now, or do we?
It did continue. It continues all the way through to the Beis Hamikdash, and that's why we don't have it now, because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash.
So in place of that, now what do we have? Is it the mikveh?
The closest thing we have is a mikveh, but we're not strict about that whole cleansing process anymore, because we don't have the temple. So there's when a person comes into contact with a dead body, all we do now is wash our hands with a cup. We don't insist that people go to the mikveh anymore to cleanse themselves. It's one of the reasons why we're not supposed to go up onto the Temple Mount, even though it's available in some way, shape, or form as a tourist site. There are many rabbis, the overwhelming majority of rabbis, who says that it's forbidden for us to go up onto the Temple Mount because we are not in a fit ritual state to be able to be on such holy turf. So yeah, presumably, I mean that's why you sometimes get these occasional news articles about the excitement that a red heifer has been found somewhere in the world, because they're extremely rare. You could only classify a red heifer as being fit for this purpose if it was completely red. If you found even 2 hairs of a different color, it wouldn't qualify. So there's this idea that if we were to find one, it would be a strong indication that the Mashiach's arrival is drawing near, because this red heifer has presented itself. So we must be getting close to a time when we would need it. And they were rare even in the time of the temple, and you could theoretically charge any amount for the Beis Hamikdash to be able to buy this red heifer off you, because when might you get the opportunity again? Trying to remember if there was a story though about the red heifer. I think there might be a story where they found one and some rabbis went to try and buy it off the seller, but he was asleep and his son was in charge, and they kept trying to offer more and more money, but he refused to wake his father up. And when he eventually woke his father up, his father took them back down to the original price instead of ripping them off for more money. I don't know if that was a red heifer, that I can't remember exactly. That kind of story happened with something. That there was something that they wanted to buy. The owner was asleep. The son was in charge. The rabbis who were trying to buy it mistook the situation for them trying to get more money out of them. They were prepared to pay. And eventually, when the father woke up, he took them back down to the original price so as not to rip them off. Whether that was about a red heifer or not, I do not recall. But there we go. Okie dokie. Let's glance over now into the world of Pirkei Avot. Are we ready, gang?
Yes.
Fantastic. So hopefully everybody there can see the words on the screen.
And
if
now
you
it's
can't,
very small.
yeah, we'll switch into speaker.
That's better.
Yeah, there we are. So let's go for this. Chapter 5, Mishnah 9. Someone will read it for us in English, but I can already see that we're going to run into a problem with this first line. There are 7 things characteristic in a clod. Well, no. So the Hebrew there says Shiva Dvarim Bagolem. We've heard of a golem, but what we will say is, let's translate this for now as an uncultivated person or a fool. Okay, so clod is not going to help us much, but let's go through this. So who wants to take us through in English, please?
Okay. Do you want me to?
I would love you to.
Okay, I'll do it. There are 7 things characteristic in a fool, and 7 in a wise man. A wise man does not speak before one who is greater than he in wisdom, and does not break into his fellow's speech, and is not hasty to answer. He asks what is relevant, and he answers to the point. And he speaks of the first point first, and of the last point last. And concerning that which he has not heard, he says, I have not heard. And he acknowledges the truth. And the reverse of these are characteristic in a fool.
Thank you very much. So give everyone a moment to digest. The 7 things that are characteristic in a chacham, and the 7 things that are characteristic in a golem. And then it lists those 7 things. Eino medaber b'fnei mishu gadol mimenu. He will not speak before giving an opportunity to someone who is wiser than him to speak. Ve'eino nichnas letoch divrei chaveiro. He does not interrupt his fellow person who is trying to speak. Ve'eino nivhal lehashiv. He is not hasty to answer. Shoel ki'inyan meishiv ka'alacha. He asks what is relevant and answers to the point. V'omer al rishon v'al acharon. He addresses each of the points in the correct order. V'al mash lo shama omer lo shama. Anything that he does not know or that he has not heard, he says, I don't know. He's not afraid to say, I don't know. And when he is wrong, he is not afraid to acknowledge the truth. And the reverse of these are how we would classify fools. So, come on, guys. Hands up who can safely say that they adhere to each of these 7 characteristics. How many chachamim do we have on the group today?
Well, 7 again, so it's obviously significant.
Okay, well, that's a good point. Let's start with that. So for the last few weeks, we've had a bunch of 10s. We don't have Peter here this week to ask us about the significance. And it's a shame, actually, because I've actually got a bit more to say. So Peter, if you're watching, so we are now on to 2 Mishnayot where we're going to talk about 7s. That's interesting because we know a lot about 7. I'm sure between us we could think of a few 7s in Judaism. Anyone want to shout out one?
Shabbat, 7th day.
Yeah.
Well, I know that on the Kabbalistic tree, the 7 lower sephirot are repeated in counting the Omer. 7 7s are 49.
Bang on, Joe. Always there with the Kabbalah. I knew I could count on you. But the Omer, is 7 times 7. Very good. Gary?
Sprinkling the blood of the red heifer 7 times on the front of the...
Wow.
Very good. The days of purification would last for 7 days.
7 facets on the stones a few weeks ago.
What were the 7 facets on the stones?
Yes, there were some stones mentioned about 3 weeks ago, I'm sure, and they had 7 facets.
Oh.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they were building blocks.
Why am I not able to think of that? Okay, but thank you, Gary. Joshua and Jericho 7 times. Oh, very good. Yeah. Fast forward into the book of Joshua, and they had to circle the town of Jericho 7 times, and then the walls came crumbling down. Wife 7 times, wedding. Oh, the wife walking around the husband 7 times. You've got Sheva brachas. You've got 7 blessings that are said. You've got the week of celebration for a wedding in which you say Sheva brachas. Shiva, that's right. When a person is mourning, so they sit Shiva. The 7 Noahide laws was just put into the chat over there. I mean, you've missed the easiest one, which is the 7 days of the week. I know Joy said that Shabbat is the seventh day, but just built into the system of nature is a 7 day cycle, which seems to exist worldwide, irrelevant of who you are and irrelevant of the background of your culture. We somehow manage to have a 7 day cycle right across the world, which is intriguing. I don't know if we've ever had a different system of weeks that would last more than 7 days. I don't know.
Someone just flashed up seven. I don't know who it was. So there were 7 arms on the menorah.
Yeah, assuming that's Yanir. You got seven branches on the menorah. So there's a whole bunch of sevens, and yet none of them make it into 70. The Shemitah. Is that what you're talking about? Shemitah is also a 7 year cycle. There we are. Thank you. Don't be afraid to come on camera and turn off your mic, Yanir. We all know it's you. Unless it's one of your kids, in which case, still come off the camera. So, a bunch of sevens, but none of these are mentioned. None of them make it into the Mishnah over here. And one thing that's quite interesting is that if we look at the tens that we've talked about the last few weeks, these are all kind of historical events, and the sevens, as we will see this week and next week, are all about human failings or human successes, I guess the converse would be. So it's just quite interesting that the tens have all been about things throughout history. Peter had asked, like, what's the connection? So I don't know why specifically 10 has to be the connecting number for talking about events and historical events, but they have been nonetheless. And the sevens are going to be about humans, about the
seven lower tree.
Pardon me?
It's the 7. Is it the 7? There are 10 sephirot, but is it the 7 lower?
That's right. Yeah.
3 others are 2 upper worlds.
That's right. Yeah, but that's all too Kabbalistic. It's all too Kabbalistic for us, Joe. You'll have to tune in.
Sorry.
You'll have to tune into the series on Lech Lecha whenever we come back to that, and we'll mention the Sephirot over there. So, one second, Gary, I will come to you. So, we've got to ask the question: why, with all of the tens and with all of the sevens, we haven't really listed all of the philosophical connections in these numbers. We've just named a whole bunch of concepts that are linked to the number 7, but they don't make it into the Mishnah. And I think fundamentally the reason is probably because Pirkei Avot is not about philosophy and theology and connections in that way, but it's about practical messages and how we can improve our lives and how we can be the best people that we can be. So we've got a lot of sevens, but Pirkei Avot chooses to mention 7 in the context of becoming a chacham rather than a golem. Gary, you wanted to ask something or say something?
No, just another one that I like is the third of excuse me, the priestly blessings, the 7 words of the third blessing. 357.
357. Yeah, very good. Okie dokie.
Can I say something?
Oh, with pleasure.
It's just we're 10 and 7.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by this, but is there obviously 1? But 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. In other words, we're looking at that. But are there parts? Is there part of Pirkei Avot or the Mishnah where there's other numbers you can bring in?
Well, we'll get to 4 in a couple of weeks' time, and there will be. There's a lot of 4s that we know about. 4 cups of wine, the 4 matriarchs. Pretty much every number in Judaism will have connections. We mentioned 70 in the bigger picture this week. 13 is a big number. 26 is a big number. Just sounds like I don't know if you remember the Mitchell and Webb show, but with Number Wang. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm in my own world. That's fine. So numbers do connect. Yeah, there will be things that connect in all of these different numbers. But they don't necessarily get listed in Pirkei Avot.
Yeah.
I mean, we had three right at the beginning. The world is founded on three things: justice, truth, and peace. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, three forefathers. So there's always things to connect in the numbers, and it is exciting when you get to see some of that in action. Okie dokie, guys, let's have a look at some of this. So Shiva Dvarim, there are 6 things, characteristics, habits, almost. There are 7 habits of highly effective people. Otherwise, you are a golem. A golem we are familiar with, the golem. We may have heard of the golem of Prague. So we've got a lot of stories about these supernatural creatures who get created throughout history by very holy men. We are familiar with the golem of Prague, which was created by the Maharal. And it's called a golem because it was unfinished. It lacked certain entities. It was a living creature of whatever that means, and however he was able to create that. But there was a level of imperfection and not being complete and being unfinished and unformed and raw. And so a golem in this context is somebody who isn't complete. They are just unfinished and they are unformed and they just don't get it. So in colloquialism, that's terribly phrased, but it's taken on this. I guess euphemism is probably a better word. Golem is a euphemism for a fool, someone who is unformed and unfinished and doesn't have the right etiquette. But someone who does have these 7 points of etiquette, they are a chacham. So what do we think about these? What do we think? So we've got a wise man does not speak before one who is greater than he in wisdom. The idea of not speaking out of turn. A wise person is courteous and respectful of others and their opinions. They're patient, they're honest, they're loyal to truth. Right, so these are all things that are qualities of a chacham, and they're to be our measuring rod for determining how wise or how foolish we are. So are there any on here that you think that you disagree with? Are there any here that you think that are missing? Good rules to use in a boardroom meeting. It's good rules to use in a Torah class as well. I know he asks what is relevant and he answers to the point. I know how difficult it is when you teach and you get a question that comes at you completely out of left field. And tangential, and it can be quite hard to deal with it and to stay focused and to stay on track. There is actually a Gemara that talks about how you should only ask people, teachers, you should ask about things at the right time and that are relevant. There's a Gemara that talks about somebody who went to ask a rabbi about a completely unfamiliar, unrelated topic to the one that they were studying, and the Gemara picks up on it and says it was inappropriate to kind of corner the rabbi in that way and to challenge them on something which they haven't had the opportunity to look into. So it is hard to deal with a question. On the one hand, we welcome all questions, but you get people who would purposely try and catch you out. I think that's really the foolish quality over here, which is you try and catch them out. You know they're not going to be able to answer your question, so you just try and like slip it in there just to throw them off, just to tilt them off balance, which is it's just not a menschlich thing to do, really. So of course we have to be able to ask our questions, but if you're purposely trying to find someone and show them up because you know they're not going to be able to answer your question, so each individual should reflect on that. Are they asking because they have a genuine desire to get to the truth, and because this is the right time to ask it, or are they asking it because they read it on the back of a cereal packet and it's a good opportunity to throw those curveballs out there? So that's for each individual to decide, really, isn't it? The other aspect let's deal with it now. This idea of shoel ki'inyan, asking things at the right time. So there's two aspects to this, which is if you know that the 3 weeks are coming up quite soon, then get your questions about the 3 weeks out now. If Rosh Hashanah's around the corner, there's no use waiting till Yom Kippur to ask your questions about Rosh Hashanah. Find the appropriate times to ask your questions. There may also be instances where people they want a particular answer, so they'll wait until a particular point in time where it's more likely that they will get that answer. If you call someone up in a panic, it's Erev Pesach, and you're like, oh, I haven't got this ready. What should I do now, Rabbi? Well, your options are very limited. So it could be that you're trying to exploit an area of leniency because you just haven't picked the right time to ask the question. If you know that something is coming up, then the wise person will realize that they need to ask their question now, not purposely wait till 5 minutes beforehand to ask the question. It's 5 minutes before Shabbos. You're like, oh, what shall I do about my hot plate? What shall I do about my fridge? What shall I do? There was a whole day for you to ask that question, if not a whole week. But you've waited until 5 minutes before Shabbos to ask your question. Is that really the smartest thing to do? So again, we always say it's a lifelong process. You can't fault someone that has asked the question at that time, but for someone who aspires to be a chacham, for someone who aspires to not be classed in these categories, so shoel ki'inyan, ask at the right time. And similarly, meishiv ka'alacha, for the person who's answering the question, get to the point. Someone who comes and asks, is dairy milk kosher, is not looking for a 4-hour shiur on the intricacies of kashrut. So the wise person understands how to get to the point and to answer the question as well. I guess you could argue, are any of these sessions meishiv ka'alacha? We always say, you can get to the point and say something in 2 minutes. What do you need the other 58 minutes for? So, although that's another story that I remember about the Chafetz Chaim, who went to speak in a town, and he went back to his host afterwards. His host was not able to be at the shiur, and he says to him, "So what did you speak about?" So he summarized in a few minutes what he spoke about for an hour. So the guy says, "Well, why did it take you an hour to say we've just told me in 4 minutes?" So he says it took 4 minutes for me to say it, but it took the rest of the time for people to actually absorb it and for it to actually go into people's minds. So either way, meishiv ka'alacha, part of the level of part of the understanding of this is to answer appropriately and to the point. What else have we got to say? So ve'eino nichnas, eino nichnas letoch divrei chavero, not to interrupt people, not to break into. Enter, nichnas is to enter, not to enter into someone else's speech. Let them get their point across. Let them speak. Let them say what they've got to say. It's so on so many levels. It's so rude to interrupt people, and it sounds so obvious. and for many people it is obvious, but yet it still happens that you don't give other people the opportunity to finish the point that they're making. And we all make this mistake, don't we? Hands up if you never make this mistake. There you go. No hands on the screen. You can be in the middle of an argument with someone, and they make a point, and you challenge the point, or you reply to the point. You don't allow the point to actually be made and digested and reflected upon, and figure out what's behind the thing that they're trying to say. It might be that they've already finished talking, but you still cut in at the wrong time. There's a level of wisdom of knowing when to speak and when to remain silent and when to digest what's being said and when to internalize and reflect on what has been said, and not just to try and get your point in there. Even if they're wrong, you still have to give people the space to speak. Very important thing there. What else do we have? We have Va'omer al Rishon Rishon v'al Acharon Acharon. The idea of dealing with the first point first and the last point last. The concept of being orderly in your thoughts, having organized thoughts, and knowing how to present and deal with things at their right time and in their right way. Tell you something very interesting. Whenever you have a Mishnah in any of the Masechtas, so typically the Gemara will start from that beginning point and work its way through and deal point by point with the statements of the Mishnah. It's interesting here, by the way, Shiva Dvarim Bagolem. I realize we're not dealing with a question here, but it's still quite interesting. Shiva Dvarim Bagolem. There are 7 habits about a golem, the Shiva B'Chacham, and 7 things about the Chacham. What's the next thing that the Mishnah does? In the very Mishnah that talks about being orderly and dealing with the first one first and the last one last, you would expect the list of 7 things that the golem does, no? Yeah? And yet it doesn't. It gives you these 7 things that the Chacham does. Quite a fascinating thing here. So part of the reason for this is a principle in and especially when you look at the end of the Mishnah, v'chilufeihen bagolem. The opposite of what we've said here is what applies to the golem. Yeah, so it never actually gives us the 7 things that a golem would do. It just tells us what a chacham would do, and then from there we're supposed to learn what not to do. Otherwise, it makes us a golem. So there's an idea, a principle in the Torah, that you always want to speak cleanly and you always want to speak politely. And so perhaps what the Mishnah is trying to do, what it's trying to do over here, is avoid speaking in an impolite and in a coarse way. So instead of listing the 7 ichi things about the golem, we list the 7 nice things about the chacham, from which we learn the opposite. We see this in the Torah as well, when Noach is commanded to take animals onto the ark, and Hashem says that you should take 7 pairs of each of the tahor animals, right? You should take 7 pairs of all of the pure animals. Now, what's the opposite of tahor?
Impure.
Pardon me?
Is it Ra?
No, it's not Ra, but a good guess.
So the impure.
Yes, but in
pure,
Hebrew, Joe. What would the Hebrew opposite of tahor be?
Trey.
Not treif, it's tameh. Tameh is the Hebrew word for impure, ritually impure. So you would expect the Torah to say, take 7 pairs of the tahor animals and take 2 pairs of the tameh animals, but the Torah doesn't say it. And we always talk about how the Torah doesn't waste words. The Torah says, take the animals asher eineno tahor, the animals which are not pure. So instead of saying the animals which are tameh, it says the ones which are not pure. And the reason, as this is talked about in the Gemara, is that the Torah will go out of its way to express itself in a clean, polite, dignified way, rather than to use coarser, unrefined concepts. So when it's appropriate to use it, it will do. But here was an opportunity where something could be talked about in a more refined way, and the Torah took that opportunity. Hashem took that opportunity. So perhaps over here as well, you would expect to list the unrefined characteristics, and instead the Mishnah goes down a different route and tells us the refined, dignified characteristics that we should all be aspiring to. So just something interesting as well. We see an example, by the way. I mean, there's examples of all of these different things. But ve'enon nichnas letoch divrei chaveron, not interrupting when someone is speaking. There's an example of this in the Torah when Avraham is trying to save the people of Sodom. And he says, what if there's 50 righteous people? What if there's 40 righteous people? What if there's 30 righteous people? So, it whittles down and down and down and down. And in the end, there's not even 10, there's not even one righteous person in Sodom that can be saved. And so it gets destroyed. But what you see is that Hashem didn't interrupt him. So just let me stop you here for a second, Abraham. You're not going to find anything. There's not going to be enough people here that can save the town. Instead, he didn't interrupt him. He allowed Avraham to finish speaking. There's other biblical examples of these different traits that you see. Got a couple of minutes left. V'alma shalosh shama omer lo shemati. If you don't know something, the wise person is not afraid to admit to it and is not afraid to say, I've not heard this, and to own up. It's such an important example of being a person of integrity and a person of honesty and intellectual honesty, and being able to own up when you don't know something. That is an indication of somebody aspiring to be wise, right? Acknowledging the truth, umodeh al ha'emet, being able to stand up and hold your hands up and say, okay, I was wrong about this, I apologize. The ability to say sorry or to concede the point when you're on the wrong team, right? We have so many intelligent people that we turn to in society, and we see over and over again and time again that they can never own up and they can never apologize. And we have this whole society of spin. Oh, well, that's not what I really meant. And oh, but what about this that I've done? And oh, what about that? Just say sorry, for goodness sake. Just say, we got it wrong. We made a mistake. We should have closed the borders a couple of weeks before the Delta 4th variant came in. Whatever it might be, just be honest. Just be a person of integrity. Just be a wise person. Just be a chacham. Say sorry. Say you were right. I was wrong. And there you go. You're a chacham in the Torah's eyes. It's as easy as that, isn't it? Surely. Anyway,
Rabbi,
you lose votes
why
that way.
didn't Moses?
Well, Paul, I'm
why
really
didn't
sorry.
Moses
Joy
say something? Oh, sorry,
had
Joy.
her hand up first.
Right, can I just, this is a quick one. Are these listed in order of importance, or are they just random? I mean, what is...
Let me see. In chronological order, one should be careful not to speak before another who is wiser than he. Oh, we didn't even speak about that. I think is it chronology? Yes, I think it's chronological here, really. Not to speak before another who is wiser. We didn't even speak about that, but that's an important point as well. That sometimes we have to be the one to get our point out. We have to be the one to get noticed. And actually, there may be someone a bit more qualified than you to speak first. So there's actually a gesture of respect and a gesture of appreciating what your limitations are. If there's someone more qualified to speak, then don't chime in first. So that would be the first point in the chronology. And then once that person has begun to speak, then you shouldn't interrupt them. And when that person has finished, you shouldn't rush to reply. Think about it, reflect, and speak in a measured, calm way. And when they do begin to speak, ask relevant questions and provide relevant answers. and reply in a sequential fashion. And when you're in doubt, say, I didn't hear this. And after you've replied, you should be ready to go back on yourself and admit the truth. So I would say there's a bit of a chronology over here.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's how I would answer that one. Over to you, Paul.
I referring to what we spoke to earlier. Moses said sorry 550 times, and it didn't seem to work. He apologized, he stood on his head, he did everything he could possibly think of to say sorry, and yet he was absolutely no way. In fact, if you ask me one more time, and yet here it says that if you haven't, you should acknowledge the truth if you're wrong, which absolutely I totally agree with. But it didn't really work well for Moses, did it? He did apologize, he did do everything he possibly could, and yet there's no give or take in the discussion. It seems again to be desperately straightforward. You can ask as much as you can do. In Judaism generally, whatever one does which is wrong, there is the concept of Yom Kippur being able to say sorry and starting off with a clean sheet. That's a concept which actually runs so deeply within Judaism. It's almost a founding stone of our religion. I just think it's quite a shame that he did everything he could, but not for you, pal. You're not going over there.
When you say I don't, when you don't know the answer to something, you should never be afraid to say I don't know.
It's quite a deep question.
I think I need to learn more about the episode to be able to have an answer to that.
Yeah. It's quite disturbing. It's on its own merit. Put it that way.
Please God, when we get to the bigger picture on Parshat Chukat, no idea when that will be, but we're a long way off. And in the meantime, I can try and find an answer, but I do not have a good answer for you now. But it is a bigger picture question to understand what was going on in that episode, and I understand what you're saying. You say why isn't God living up to his own expectations over here? There is a reason. I just don't know what it is.
Like so many of these things, we just can't find an answer.
There might be an answer. I'm not saying there's no answer. I'm just saying I don't know it.
Well, there may not be an answer. I think it's quite. It just may not have an answer.
The answer will be that once we've got an appreciation of what is going on in the episode, then we will understand why Hashem had to give that response. But we have to learn, and we have to continue. We have to be patient, and we have to be open to saying when we don't know something, and we'll get there eventually, and we can speed up that process with our own homework. So there you go, Paul. You've got your own homework to do.
Come over Moses.
Why not?
Why not?
But we have to learn the story. We have to see the bigger picture of what was going on, and see the context of how it fits in with everything. And I'm not there yet. So one day I will be. Okay, ladies and gents, 1:05. That's all for today. We're going to say goodbye to you all on the recording. Thank you all for joining us. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, we wish you a wonderful, meaningful day.